to A Taste for the Road. My name is Scott, and welcome to the Porsche Cayenne. So I've been wanting to review one of these on the project here for quite some time, and it might seem a bit counterintuitive. After all, like probably quite a few of you, I'm a dyed-in-the-wool sports car fan, and this is, after all, a truck, even though it's got some pretty good sporting chops. But the reality is that while you and I, when we think of Porsche, think of the 911, 356, maybe the 928, and some of their other sports car products, the reality is that for the last decade and a half or so, most people who are buying a Porsche are in fact purchasing a truck. So this was released in 2004. The Macan, of course, is a much more recent product, but between the both of them, they outsell the Panamera and every other product that Porsche sells 2-to-1 in basically all of its different markets. So when you think about a household that's going to be wanting one of these and buy one or lease new, and then a few years down the road go ahead and have a second owner go ahead and purchase one of these, the reality is that for the Porsche brand, in many people's eyes, it's in fact going to be a Cayenne, or again, more recently, a Macan, which is just a strange place to be, depending on your age and, again, how you think about what Porsche really is at its core. This is an important truck because for Porsche, at the time that this was released, a little less than 20 years ago, Porsche was really in quite a bit of trouble. They were, again, just in deep financial, they were financially challenged, and this truck basically saved them and allowed them to remain independent for, a number of years into the future until, of course, the Volkswagen Automotive Group went ahead and officially purchased them. But it's significant because the first generation truck, 270,000 units, this Gen 2 series from 2011 to 2017, 500,000 units. I think sometime next year, Porsche will probably will go ahead and announce that they will have sold the 1 millionth Cayenne, either here in the US, Europe, maybe in Asia or something like that. But no matter how you slice it, the truck space for Porsche is absolutely essential, and of course, as you've probably read elsewhere, allowed the 918 Spyder to become available to re-inject cash into the 911 range and obviously broaden it dramatically. And so I think it's just an enormously significant product for Porsche as a brand, but I think also very much for its customers. And it's not surprising because it's such a practical vehicle that allows for someone who's really going to be in that age bracket, say 35 to 60, who will have a family, who will have elderly relatives, who will need to go to IKEA, drop off kids at the university, and do 1,000 other things, that it will have room to do all of that and more. Significant about this particular one, it is a 2015, so it's about 5 years old, and is the Cayenne S. So this particular one, 2015, was when there were a number of updates made to this particular truck, mid-cycle refresh essentially. So the front end got a little bit of changed treatment with some of the vents and louvers and so forth. The lights in the back changed. The features here in the car, what came base, this was a $74,000 truck here in the US, new, came with more features than I think certainly should have. The big controversy, or somewhat controversial, is in fact the engine choice up front. So for the first part of the Gen 2 series, it was a naturally aspirated 4.8 liter V8. Potent motor, people loved it, great noise. Beginning in 2015, it was replaced, and what's up front is a 3.6 twin turbo. Headline stats, as you've probably seen them elsewhere, 420 horsepower, 406 foot-pounds of torque, 0 to 60, 5.1 seconds or so. Top speed of around, 150, a little bit more than that, depending on what the limiter would allow. It's a fairly, quick truck. I would say under full acceleration, off camera, it's brisk more than mighty, and that obviously if you feel you need more power, as this is not a light vehicle, it's around 4,500 pounds or so, you probably should pop up for the real labeled turbo, although of course all of them are in fact turbocharged. Extending things out into the chassis and the dynamics, it's a pretty good place actually. I was expecting it to be a much firmer ride, but it's very, very well composed on these back roads. Earlier today I was basically testing it on some really pockmarked pavement. I didn't film it because you'd be jumping, or I would be jumping all over the place in front of you, and that wouldn't be too pleasing, but it really just soaked up some of the bumps rather nicely. This does not have the air suspension. It has the standard steel springs and dampers, and does actually really quite a nice job. I can't complain for what that is. The steering, it's a hydraulic setup, and you can absolutely feel that difference. It's very, very nice. The only model within the Cayenne range for Gen 2 that had electric assist was the hybrid system, or the hybrid choice. And yeah, it's the communication and the feel, combined with just, again, how much poise there is here on real, regular American roads, not the beautiful glass smooth German stuff, is very much welcome. And yeah, it's just, you can feel that Porsche DNA, despite, again, a very elevated center of gravity, a fair amount of weight as well. But for such a large truck, and for its, again, width and its length and height in particular, it's a really quite a dynamic place to be for a truck. Extending the conversation into the cabin, it's quite a nice place to be. So Porsche always gets right, which I deeply admire about the company, the weighting of all of the controls and just your position, as others have said too, but it just needs to be, I think, celebrated for what it is, which is that this steering wheel is in exactly the right place. The seat position relative to the binnacle, and of course to the dash, is just great. And you can keep yourself nice and low, as I prefer. I'm sure for those who enjoy being higher up, you can accomplish the same thing, and everything still works pretty nicely. The weighting of everything is just simply spot on, and it's absolutely identical, whether it's the steering, whether it's the accelerator or the brake, and the brakes are quite good given the weight of this particular vehicle. The switchgear here in the middle, or even the electric window lifts, etc., they all just have a very similar weight to them. And this is not a new car. This is a 2015. It has, under my responsibility today, rolled 90,000 miles, and yet there are no rattles in this. Not one. And this is a car that inevitably, based on its mileage, has been used, I would say, probably essentially pretty much every day of its life, and yet still feels tight, still feels as though it was made with quality hands. Some of the switch gear is a little bit weak. It seems as though it's come out of the VW part bin. If I'm incorrect, please scold me in the comments below. But that aside, the fit and finish and the materials, the leather seats here are very, very comfortable. The center console, of course, is quite busy, in this version, but as you probably will know if you've watched other videos of the new Gen 3 that was released last year, they have cleaned that up quite a bit, but still left a few buttons, such as for the heated seats and so forth like that. It just has a nice premium feel to it, and as it should, because this is not exactly an inexpensive truck to purchase or lease, and the options, as almost I think everyone knows with Porsche, can be very lengthy, which is great, but ratchets up the price pretty quickly. Visibility is quite good as well, even as we kind of move back and forth on some of these fine twisty roads. The D-pillar is a bit on the thick side, but you do have, of course, the rear view camera. I just like to see better just out of the box, but that could be a criticism leveled at lots and lots of products. And what I do very much like about the Cayenne, even though it's not quite as popular now as the Macan, because the Macan's a little bit more sporty, is that this is a bit more traditional box. You can use it without compromise with tall folks in the rear seats, that the back end can store lots of big boxes from IKEA and elsewhere. There's just a functionality to this truck as a mid-size, or in the mid-size segment, with obviously no third row seat, that still just makes it not just only very livable, but essentially a very practical truck as well, which definitely gets a thumbs up in my book. As if I owned one of these, it would be great to be able to use it to its full capacity and still enjoy, many of the Porsche attributes and specialness that is definitely part of this truck and part of the Porsche experience. Thinking about this truck's competition, and there are lots of them. As all of us know, this is a segment, broadly speaking, and then particularly in the mid-sized piece of it, where there is just an endless series of competitive choices. Obviously, the BMW X5 came first by a number of years before this showed up on the landscape, but whether it's from Mercedes, it's from the Japanese, Infiniti, etc., Alfa Romeo. Again, depending on how you think about the mid-size segment, there are just an endless number of choices. What I do think is compelling about Porsche is the way they've carved out not just it being one of the sportiest, if not the sportiest, depending on the specification, such as the Turbo or the Turbo S. Obviously, this is a more standard configuration, but one that I really wanted to test drive because it's what most people would actually be buying. This one is more or less the bread and butter here in the States, where obviously in other markets it might be the diesel or more recently the hybrid version. But nevertheless, there is just a lot of Porsche goodness just sprinkled all over this thing, and you genuinely can feel that it is absolutely a different product from so much that is, in this marketplace and just not very differentiated. An example of that last month, and I'll put a link up below if you'd be interested. I went ahead and tested and evaluated the current generation Jeep Wrangler Unlimited. Very different from this, but it is also a product that is, very much an archetype and one that stands out in a very crowded space with something that is genuinely unique. And I think that is just increasingly rare. Finally, around the topic of value, which I enjoy covering, and I don't see other reviewers doing it quite in the same way. I think as a used proposition, certified or obviously from a private sale or independent dealer, this can be really quite a compelling truck to purchase, whether it is this S, it's the diesel, the newer hybrid, or of course the full-fat Turbo and Turbo S. This I was able to find even certified in area dealers on the East Coast here in January of 2020 for, around maybe $41,000 or $42,000 or so. A higher mileage one like this could be obviously in the low 30s. I was even seeing a few that were in the very high 20s. The Turbo obviously is going to be more money, but even in the mid-50s, that was a $150,000 truck when it was brand new, we'll say 5 years ago. I'll just use the 2015 model year as my basis point. And that if you're careful, and I think do a pre-purchase inspection per usual, and find the nice independent Porsche specialist, and there are lots of them around, that you can not only pick one of these up that's in really very, very nice shape, but have a good ownership experience. When I looked on the forums again to see what types of problems the Gen 2 in particular had, outside of a few early cars around, or trucks, around the transfer case, I really didn't see an enormous amount of systemic problems. It's best to probably avoid the Gen 1 and the early trucks through 06. They were really very problematic, and best left to others. But I do think that as a proposition for practical use, as a sporting SUV that does genuinely have some sports car-ish like chops and just feels different on the road, that the Cayenne is an awfully good value proposition. I think because of the Macan and its popularity as well, prices have fallen just ever so slightly further with the Cayenne, and as a consequence, if you're someone who wants the slightly bigger truck because you want the, if you will, fuller SUV experience, one of these is an awfully, I think, compelling proposition, again, for lots of practical and, if you need it, more sporting desires. So we are just outside of Marshall, Virginia. It's time for a bit of a coffee stop. I could use some high test here. We haven't had on the project coffee stop in a few videos, and it seems like we should revisit that. Cordial Coffee in Marshall does a very nice job. I've been a number of times. Their specialty, on top of course roasting their own beans, are some waffles, and they're pretty good too. I'll probably just do coffee today, but on a previous visit, definitely worthwhile, and I'll of course include a link below once this video drops. So let's go ahead and head over to Cordial Coffee, enjoy a little bit of high test, and then we'll go ahead and get back on the road and sum up this Cayenne and see what we think. See you there. That was a very nice stop at Cordial Coffee. Ended up having my usual mocha, which I love, with its combination of coffee and chocolate. Feeling pretty peppy at this point, so it's nice to be properly caffeinated once again. As I always do, I'll include a link below if you'd be interested in checking them out, whether it's here in Marshall or they also have another shop out in Berryville, which I've been to as well, and it's very nice. They have a lovely interior. It's quite a soulful little place. So transitioning back to this Cayenne S and summing it up and thinking about what it has to offer and its shortcomings and stuff. So let's start with the negatives first. I think for some, the lack, particularly for this 2015 and moving forward with the S, the lack of a V8, which is more sonorous than this twin turbo 6, which is still nevertheless potent, is a bit of a miss. I think the fact that it's still an expensive vehicle to service, even in an independent service shop with a proper maintenance history, is something that you have to note and certainly go ahead and plan for. I think some of the bits on the interior are a bit weak given its price point. It's starting at $75K or so. I mean, the switchgear ought to be a little bit better, but overall the quality and fit and finish of the materials, also in this particular example, or with this particular example, the fact that it's done over 90K and still is really a very tight vehicle, the leather's in very nice shape, is notable as well. It's just, from a practical standpoint, offering a certainly feel through these corners and so forth, even at moderate speed. It's an enjoyable truck to drive, and normally we don't say that trucks are enjoyable to drive. They're functional, but they don't always have the sporting characteristics that this has, just, up its sleeve and, everywhere that you look. It's a genuine sporting truck. It's not a sports car, certainly, and as others have noted, this Cayenne, the Macan, and the Pan America, these are luxury vehicles from Porsche. If you want a sports car, you get one of their sports cars. But I think it's just notable that they've been able to, both from its original inception with the Gen 1 all the way through now to the Gen 3, and including the 2 iterations of this Gen 2, that they've infused the Cayenne, a very traditional-sized, mid-sized truck, with just a lot of genuine sporting credentials. And you can simply feel it. You can feel it through this hydraulically assisted steering wheel. You can feel it through the accelerator and the brake. There's a honedness and just a sense of integration with this product, and with, I think, really any Porsche, that DNA is still very firmly in place. And I think for the original owner, for subsequent owners, whoever you happen to be, you're just going to be able to experience that in full based on the type of truck that you decide to get, whether it's a slightly more toned down and practical version like this one here, you want one that has the diesel, or you want the full fat with the turbo or the Turbo S that will launch you into the horizon and bend the sky with 500 plus or 550 plus horsepower. It's just it is, for its type, I think it's a special vehicle and something worth celebrating, because as this is quite closely coming up on its 20-year anniversary, I happen to think these are going to be collectible in time, particularly the early first-generation trucks, despite their lack of reliability. There's just going to be, I think, for some Porsche owners, as I mentioned earlier, whose first experience and perhaps only experience is going to be this Cayenne or perhaps the Macan, but we'll obviously stick with this truck, that this will be the ideal Porsche experience for them, and that will always be the way in which they refer and kind of frame what Porsche means to them, what that sporting experience will always be like out on the road or wherever they happen to be. And for that, I think it's always going to be a special vehicle. So I think that just about sums up this video. I hope you found it enjoyable and informative. Please give me a thumbs up if you can. Subscribe if you'd enjoy being alerted to new videos as they become available. Don't, of course, forget to hit the bell so you get that notification. Most importantly, please go out and create your own adventure, whether that's to see something that you do know in a new way or something completely new, and then share that with us in the comments below. And with that, I think I will go ahead and bid you adieu, and I will see you in the next video. Ciao!